If you've ever played a Pokemon game before, you know these guys. These starters, they're the most iconic Pokemon. Okay, other than this guy, but he's technically a starter. These Pokemon are iconic. Here are 20 facts that not even the most seasoned Pokemon players may know about their favorite starter Pokemon. We all know the starter Pokemon Blaziken. He was one of the original Generation 3 starters along with Swampert and Sceptile, but did you know that he was intended to be a legendary Pokemon, or Latias was intended to be a starter? If you didn't know, when the original development of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire were going on, the Pokemon designers mixed Blaziken's and Latias' design to be one singular Pokemon. There is actually concept art that I'll throw up on the screen right now. I personally don't think these Pokemon go together, and I'm glad they defused them, but that's just me. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Speaking of Blaziken, did you know that Blaziken appeared in the anime before Typhlosion? Sort of. Blaziken first appeared in the anime episode Pop Goes the Sneasel, which aired in 2002 in Japan and 2003 in the United States. For some reason, despite him being a starter, Typhlosion only appeared in the anime for a brief special which aired in 2001 in Japan, but didn't air in the US until the year 2006. Typhlosion also appeared in the 3rd generation anime in 2003 in Japan and 2004 in the United States in the episode Gonna Rule the School. To make sense of things, Typhlosion first aired in the year 2001 in Japan, and Blaziken first aired in the year 2003 in the States during the main series of the anime. Moving on from Fire-type starters, let's talk about Piplup. Piplup is a fan favorite Pokemon, and I'm sure most people would like to have one in real life, but did you know that Piplup is incredibly hard to bond with? This is because Piplup is very prideful and does not accept help from anybody. If you've only played the games like me, then you probably didn't know this fact because the games don't really show off the Pokemon's personality. However, in the anime this does show up a little bit, but not really, so it is a pretty hard fact to miss overall. Starter Pokemon usually suck when we pick them up. They don't have a stab move, instead they have a stat lowering move and an attacking move, except this guy. If the player picks Turtwig, then Turtwig comes with Withdrawal. Withdrawal raises defense, and it's the only starter Pokemon to come with a stat boosting move. Even more interesting, Withdrawal is a water type move, and this is a very rare instance of a grass type Pokemon learning a water type move. We all know you could name your Pokemon whatever you wanted to during the first 4 generations. It took Game Freak 14 years to catch on because when Pokemon Black and White released, they introduced a name censoring system. You could not nickname Pokemon with an offensive nickname or trade them on the GTS, but there were some problems that were introduced here. For example, some Pokemon's names had combinations of words that were censored like this guy, but there were some starter Pokemon who also got banned. For example, the entire Bulbasaur line was banned from trading because their names contained the letters SAU, which in German translates to pig or swine. The other starter that couldn't be traded was Croconaw, which has Con, which means idiot. Luckily, they later lifted this effect in later games, so at least Bulbasaur and Croconaw are free. We all know the traditional starter Pokemon. They're always grass, fire, and water. But did you know that Poipole is a starter Pokemon? In the Generation 7 games, after you obtain Poipole, its Dex entry says this Ultra Beast is well liked enough to be chosen as a first partner Pokemon in its own world, which I think is pretty cool and adds some lore to Poipole. The Charizard line has gone over a lot of changes during its design phase. For example, its shiny used to look like this in Generation 2. Yeah, Barney comes to mind when I think of this design. I'm glad in Generation 3 we got this much cooler black shiny instead. Just as interesting, in the Generation 1 games, Charmander had spikes on its back. I think this is a pretty cool design, but Game Freak didn't think so because that design is stuck in Generation 1 forever. We all know this guy's face. Even if you haven't played any Pokemon games, you know this guy's obsession to complete the Pokedex and Ash's mom. Maybe that's why he only has 3 of the 151 Pokemon. Maybe Oak hates the Pokedex so much because in the Generation 1 games, in the Japanese version, if you evolve your starter Pokemon before Oak gives you the Pokedex, your game will soft lock and Oak won't give you the Dex and the drunk old man won't move. This is due to a coding error because the total number of Pokemon increases to 2 and the game already thinks you have a Pokedex. This was fixed in Red and Blue, but they kept this in Yellow because your starter Pikachu does not evolve. Even more interesting, in the Generation 4 games, if you manage to evolve your starter, Professor Rowan will thank you and think you're a pretty cool trainer. There are a bunch of random Pokemon in the side games that are starters. For example, in Colosseum, your starters are an Espeon and an Umbreon. This was to show the new double battle mechanic. In Pokemon Masters EX, you have a choice between a Pikachu, Onix, and Starmie. This was to reference the two Kanto gym leaders, Brock and Misty. In the anime, many characters don't have traditional starter Pokemon. For example, Jesse's starter was an Ekans, and James started off with a Growlithe, which ran away. Another example is the champion Iris. Iris rescued a Jolbur from a mine, and it became her starter Pokemon. There are too many to name, so I'll throw the rest on the screen, but arguably the most interesting starter choices are in the game Pokemon Battle Revolution. Sure, the 3 Sinnoh starters are there, but they're in their second stage. There are also 3 other starters in Gabite, Luxio, and Staravia, all of which are in their second stage evolutions. Even more interesting, the gender you pick also determines your starter choices. The female choices are the 3 Kanto starters, which are also in their second stages. The other 3 starters are Dragonair, Rhyhorn, and Pidgeot, which is the only one of the 12 Pokemon to be fully evolved. By the way, you should tell me your favorite starter Pokemon down in the comments below, and while you're down there, you might as well like the video and subscribe. Have you ever sat there and just thought, man, I wish I could get all 3 of the Johto starters in my playthrough of Gold, Silver, or Crystal? Well, there is a glitch that involves picking one of the starter Pokemon, going to your PC, depositing one of the starter Pokemon, then saving, and midway through saving, turning off your Game Boy or your 3DS. When you open up the game next, you start your save file, and in the PC is the same starter Pokemon that you deposited. The interesting thing is when these games were ported to the 3DS in 2017, Game Freak didn't even bother to fix most of the glitches, meaning you can still do this on your 3DS right now. Infernape is based on an ape, right? After all, the name Infernape has ape in it. Wrong. As cool as the name sounds, this is inaccurate because apes do not have tails while Infernape does. I'm kind of surprised that Game Freak went ahead with this, but to be fair, there's probably not a better name to give to a fire monkey. Did you know that Popplio was originally supposed to be in the Generation 2 games? In 2019, a bunch of beta Pokemon for Gold, Silver, and Crystal leaked, and one of the beta Pokemon that never made it into the final cut was a 3-stage Seal Pokemon that represents Popplio. It's unconfirmed if this was actually Popplio, but design-wise, I think they're pretty similar, so it's safe to assume that Popplio was originally supposed to take Totodile's spot. Did you know that Pikachu helps us see? Sort of. In 2008, a man named Shigeru Sato LL, I probably butchered that, discovered a protein in our eye. The scientists decided to name the protein Pikachurin after, you guessed it, Pikachu. The protein helps our eyes work properly by making sure the signals from what we see gets into our brain quickly and accurately. Even more interesting, Sonic got his own cell, which I think is pretty cool. Pokemon's names have different meanings in other languages. This is an obvious fact. However, for some reason, the Chikorita's line stayed the exact same from the Japanese to the English dub. This actually makes sense when you consider the name. Bayleaf is a pretty perfect name, and it does make a lot of sense, and I think it's a pretty cool name overall. Staying on topic with the grass starters, did you know that only grass starters have a secondary type when you first pick them up? These are Bulbasaur and Rowlet. Bulbasaur is part poison type, and Rowlet is part flying type. Even more interesting is the fact that Rowlet loses his flying type and instead gets the ghost type. Rowlet to this day is the only starter Pokemon to lose his secondary typing and instead get a new typing. Even more interesting, this has only been done a couple of times throughout the series' history. Speaking of Bulbasaur, did you know that there's a real species called the Bulbasaurus? The Bulbasaurus are an extinct species that belong to the Diconatus. The Diconatics were closely related to mammals of the modern world and lived around 270 million years ago. However, the species isn't named after Bulbasaur specifically, according to the scientists who discovered it. Christian Cameron decided to name the Bulbasaurus after its bulbous nose, whatever that means. Every starter Pokemon, no matter the type, species, or generation it was introduced, will always have one of the 3 abilities as its non-hidden ability. Torrent for the water types, Overgrowth for the grass types, and Blaze for the fire types. Despite the different names, they all do the same thing and boost the starter's Pokemon's main type, so grass, fire, water when the Pokemon is at low enough HP. These abilities are unique to the starter Pokemon if it weren't for these 3 little guys. The Elemental Monkeys. Despite being the most hated group of Pokemon, literally, Simisear got voted the worst Pokemon in Japan for some reason. I mean, come on, it's a cool monkey. The trio that actually means something, it represents see no evil, hear no evil, and do no evil. Like, come on. Oh crap, it's time to take my pills because I told my doctor I was addicted to defending these monkeys. Oh god. Anyway, these monkeys were introduced in Generation 5 to represent a fake starter trio. Likewise, they also got Torrent, Blaze, and Overgrow as their abilities, which does make a lot of sense when you think about it. Froakie's design may be based on Japanese thieves. The The bubbles on his back represents a backpack or a hood. The specific type of thief is a Doro, which is a thief from Japanese folklore. They wore clothes to hide their stolen stuff and make sure their identity is concealed via a hood, which Froakie does with its bubbles. It is kind of interesting how they turned a frog into a thief. Despite the Oshawott line being one of the first Pokemon in the Unova Pokedex, it was actually the last line to be designed for the Generation 5 Pokedex. According to the designers, water-type Pokemon in general are pretty hard to design. However, after taking a trip to an aquarium, they decided to go with the Sea Otter design and combine that with the Samurai theme to make, in my opinion, the best Generation 5 starter. And for our final fact, the Charizard line, as well as the other two forgettable lines, were designed backwards. The designer wanted Charizard to have a big reveal and surprise the player. However, they didn't know that Charizard was actually going to be on the Pokemon Red and Blue box art, which I think is pretty hilarious. And those are 20 Pokemon facts. I hope you found something interesting. Thank you so much for the support. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me who your favorite starter is, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.